Hello, BookTube. This is probably going to be the last video of 2017. Um, Day 2 of 10 below uh, 0 Fahrenheit here in Vermont. It's a cold weather system that has hit much of the country, and this this house is very old. It's from the 1850s, so it's got sections of it that can be a bit drafty. You'll see I'm a little wrapped up here. Um, I'm sitting upstairs in my little reading nook by a window, which doesn't help. But this is my spot, so this is what I got. So I like to wrap up the year. There's been a lot of these videos. I enjoy them very much. This is about half of that year was spent on BookTube. At the very end of, I think, June, we started putting the channel together, but really started making videos and posting them in July. So it's been very exciting in that way. As far as the books themselves, since I started, of course, I've been influenced by booktubers to change a little bit of what I wanted to read, and then I've done some buddy reads with Ernest Lee Eston and with Elena Macrodina. There's been various read-alongs. I took part a little bit in the Shake Tube with Lukashist and Curtis Books and Films. Enjoyed that. Paperback Junkies Agathon, which I thought was a hoot. And then just hearing reviews and chats and stuff. I've picked up a few of those books. So just to give you an idea, when I start out the year, I always have the same reading goal. And it's always 52 books. And the reason for that is I figure a book a week. I work, I have children. We do lots of school things with the kids. I'm on too many committees and organizations because of my work. So I have late nights out a lot of times with meetings and that sort of thing. And even though my profession is books as a librarian, my personal reading is supplemented by like reading a lot of reviews or watching reviews for library purchases, those sort of things. So my bookish world, it is most of my life, but my reading for enjoyment, I try to get in a book a week. Some weeks yes, some weeks no. So this year I managed to read 58 books, which is a good average for me. And I wanted to talk a little bit about a few of them. I think I have a list here. This Commonplace book is done this year. And it goes back to, it looks like it goes back to 1994. Does that make, yeah, 94. So I have a list in the back here, a list how many books I read per year. So like 1994, I read 90 books. Another year, 2002, I only read 43. So every year is a little different. So this year, 58. So that's right in line. It just matters what I'm reading, too. So I started off the year, the first thing I did was, because of my work, I realized that I had a little bit of a blind spot with some of the juvenile and young adult books. As a library director, obviously, I have a specialist who deals in those areas, but I felt like I was missing out on some of the conversations. So I went out and I read the first two Percy Jackson and the Olympians. I read The Lightning Thief and The Sea of Monsters by Rick Riordan. Excuse me, and absolutely loved them. Really, really enjoyed them. Then I followed that up with a science fiction novel, Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey, who we all know is actually two writers. And I enjoyed that, and I really, really enjoyed the TV series. Maybe more than the book. I haven't read all the books, so that's not fair to say, but I really look forward to the TV series, and my wife and I watch that, each season of that as it comes out. And then I read a sort of a contemporary classic, Jamie Ford's Hotel on the Corner of Bitter and Sweet, which is about, on some level, about the Japanese internment camps, World War II. Wonderful novel. I'm not a big contemporary fiction guy, but this I really, really enjoyed. This title is fantastic. The Weed That Strings the Hangman's Bag by Alan Bradley. It's a mystery. It's part of a mystery series, Young Girl in Britain. Just a great title and a great book. And then I read Keith Houston. He wrote a book called The Book, which I did show on a BookTube video. And it's a history of the book. And I read a lot of those types of things. This one was very well done. Then Samuel Eliot Morison, who I mentioned earlier, is my favorite nonfiction author in one of the tags we did, a historian. And I read Admiral of the Ocean Sea, The Life of Christopher Columbus. And then a Vermont type book I read was First Person Rural, Essays on of a Sometimes Farmer by Noel Perrin. There was a series of those. First Person Rural, Second Person Rural, Third Person Rural, that type of thing. And then another Samuel Eliot Morison, The Rope Makers of Plymouth, which sounds boring, but was actually quite enjoyable. It's a history of a company. Not something I do a lot of, but I enjoyed it. And then, excuse me, I read a book, another nonfiction book, by Ferenc Mate. And he's written a lot of well-known books about boats. And then he's written some fiction, some thriller types that have a sort of a nautical theme. But this is one of his books about living in Tuscany, where he lives now, and it's called The Wisdom of Tuscany, and I enjoyed it very much. And then Shakespeare, I read Richard III. And then for poems, Mary Oliver's Blue Horses poems. And then I decided, well, I need to read some manga. And I hadn't been reading any. And it's a huge phenomenon. So I thought, well, I'm going to read one. I'm going to read one of the more popular series just to get a taste and see what people enjoy. And then it was, I think you would say it, Masashi Kishimoto. And I read Naruto 1 and enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. And then I read Francis Parkman, an older historian, Pioneers of France in the New World. And then a friend had me read Lawrence Dorfman's The Snark Handbook, the sex edition, which was funny. A little dated, some of the stuff was silly. But how would it not be in a book like that, right? And then I read another Naruto, number 2, The Worst Client by Kishimoto, which I enjoyed, but I think it sort of wore on me a little bit, so I didn't really continue on. I'd like to read some more manga, and that's going to be, again, more popular series, just so I have a background for my work, so I can actually converse and have at least some idea what's going on. Then I read Sarah Bakewell, How to Live How to Live or a Life of Montaigne, excuse me. Excellent. I've always liked her stuff anyway, and made me want to go and read Montaigne. So I'm looking for a Heritage Press box set. It came out years ago. That's the version I want to read. So I'll run into it eventually. Then I read Nathaniel Philbrook, contemporary historian, at Valiant Ambition about George Washington and Benedict Arnold. Excellent book. And then for a break, I read Christy Golden's Star Trek Voyager, A Murdered Sun, S-U-N. I hadn't really read any of the Voyager novels. I'm the original series type of guy, and then I also like Enterprise for the newer series. But this was really good. I enjoyed it. Fun. It's not like a classic or anything, but it was a fun read. And then another book I read trying to understand an area of reading where I don't have a lot of experience. Jane Aiken Hodge did a nonfiction book called The Private World of Georgette Heyer about the Regency romance novelist. She wrote other stuff too, but that's what she's primarily famous for. So that gives me a little background. It was very well done, well illustrated. I enjoyed it. And then Ray Bradbury did a nonfiction book about his time working with John Huston and on this screenplay for Moby Dick, and it's called Green Shadows, White Whale. It's one of those Ray Bradbury books I'd never read, and it was something eye-opening. A very disturbing book, I felt. So I'd recommend it, though. And then Maurice Sendak, most of you know who he is, and I read his book, Caldecott and Company, Notes on Books and Pictures, which I thought was excellent. It's a series of essays and about a lot of the children's writers and illustrated books, and I learned a lot. Then I read a Nick Carter book, codename Werewolf, which I enjoyed. That I read when I started watching the Paperback Junkies channel, a channel I really, really enjoy. And I had read Nick Carter as a young man. There's hundreds of them. They're a pulpy type of series of spy adventures. Then I read The Hunter by John Le Carre, I believe is how you pronounce his name. I'm probably just brutalizing that. Started off, wasn't overly impressed, but by the time I was done, it's a thriller. I really enjoyed it. So I'll probably go back and read more of his work. And then I read A Most Dangerous Book by Christopher Krebs about Tacitus on the German people. I saw that book discussed by Ernest Lieston on his channel. Fantastic book. I ended up buying it for the library. It was so good. And a lot of people at my library have read it since and all say the same thing. Excellent. A very eye-opening book. And then I read 2 books of poetry by Billy Collins, because it seemed like everybody knew who Billy Collins was but myself. I don't know. Sometimes I miss these things. So I read Aimless Love's new and selected poem, and The Rain in Portugal, a newer book of poetry by him. And I enjoyed them. I mean, I like poetry anyway, but yeah, I thought they were very good. And then Anna Quindlen, I read her nonfiction work, Imagined London, which I thought was really good. It's at National Geographic. I think it's called New Directions. It's their collections of famous writers doing travel books, and one of the better ones in the series. And then moving along, I read Peter Gay wrote Godless Jew about Freud, a very good book. Then with the Agathon that was run by Paperback Junkie, I read Cards on the Table by Agatha Christie. And then another nonfiction, The Last Apocalypse by James Reston Jr., which was a good nonfiction book about not the turn of the last millennium, but the prior. Then Fawford and Grey Mouser, I read Fritz Leiber's Sword and Deviltry, which I always love. If I need a fantasy that's got a little bit of humor, those are there. Then for science fiction, I read Komar by Lois McMaster Bujold, which is one of my favorite series in science fiction ever. So Miles Vorkosigan is the character that they follow. Then for a slightly disappointing read for me, I understand how culturally important it is, was Douglas Adams' A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I guess the humor just doesn't match my own very well. But I'm glad I read it. I mean, it's one of those books that I really believe is an important book culturally. So then again, to try to improve my understanding of young adult fiction or juvenile fiction, Avi, read The True Confessions of Charlotte Doyle, loved it. An adventure set at sea. It was right up my alley. It was really well done. I very much enjoyed it. And then for nonfiction, to try to keep up to date with technology and all that, A Mind at Play: How Claude Shannon Invented the Information Age by I think it's Jimmy Sohn and Rob Goodman. Really, some sections were a little over my head, but it was readable and it was enjoyable, and I learned a lot about the information age. And then a book sent to me by Steve Donahue, The Ghost Ships of Brooklyn, An Untold Story of the American Revolution by Robert P. Watson. I really enjoyed. And the prison ships in New York, where the revolutionary soldiers were sent, was just horrific. I mean, war crimes. There's no other way to put it. And it interlocked a little with the story of the founding of my own library. It was founded by the granddaughter or daughter, I can't remember. I think it was the granddaughter. Yeah, it was. It was the granddaughter of a man that he had been on a prison ship in New York. So it was quite interesting. Then, because I'm a huge Star Trek fan, I read Leonard, My 50-Year Friendship with a Remarkable Man by William Shatner and David Fisher. Interesting book. There's a lot to that relationship that's gotten press over the years. It's very interesting. And I think it was well done. I didn't expect it to be. And I'm glad I read it because it's a Star Trek connection, but I ended up really liking it. Then Ursula K. Le Guin, her essays, No Time to Spare, thinking about what matters, a lot of it with her getting older and her pets and her lifestyle and her writing. It was very interesting. And then I read Umberto Eco, a similar type of thing, a collection of essays, but this case from a newspaper. Le Guin has been from her blog. Umberto Eco's was from newspaper pieces he had done before he died, and that was called Chronicles of Liquid Society. Again, anything by Umberto Eco I usually like. And then by John Kaag, a nonfiction book, American Philosophy, a Love Story. Maybe one of my favorite books of the year. And it's about a philosophy professor in the Boston area who comes up and finds this philosophy library abandoned in the mountains of New Hampshire. Incredible story. And then, because I'm a big Julia Child fan, Julia's Cats. Julia Child and the Company of Cats by Patricia, it looks like Barry and Therese Burson. Very good. History, Crispin's Day, The Glory of Agincourt by Rosemary, it looks like, I think it's Holly German. I'm reading these off my commonplace book, so sometimes writing looks like my writing. Then I read Tolkien and the Silmarillion by Clyde S. Kilby. It was all right. Then on Peg's channel, she had talked about Avengers of the Moon, a Captain Future novel by Alan Steele. And I loved it. Absolute great adventure, old style space opera. And again, I ended up buying that for the library. And yeah, everybody's been taking it out. It was very good. And then, again, to get back into some graphic novels, I read Mouse Guard, The Fall of 1152, and Mouse Guard, The Winter of 1152, both by David Peterson. Loved the artwork. Enjoyed the stories very much. There's more of them. I probably will finish that series out. Then, as a buddy read with Ernest Liesson, I read Arkady and Boris Strugatsky's Hard to Be a God in a newer translation. And I think we're going to buddy read Stanislaw Lem this year, Solaris, and it was really good. I'm glad he was reading it and invited me to join him. I very much enjoyed it, and I'd like to read some more Eastern European and Russian science fiction. I actually like to read some more science fiction from around the world, and there's a lot of good stuff going on, and I'd like to be a part of it. Then I read a book on writing, draft number 4 on the writing process by John McPhee, which I thought was excellent. Excellent book. And John McPhee, to me, is always excellent. And Mystery, A Rare Benedictine by Ellis Peters. And Steve has kindly sent me a pile of her paperbacks. So I'll be reading more Ellis Peters this year. I really enjoyed the Brother Cadfael mysteries. And then, of course, Dragonflight, Anne McCaffrey. We've been doing a buddy read with Elena Macrodina on that. We're on the second one we just finished, and it looks like we're going to do the third. And then the first of the Old Man's War books, Old Man's War by John Scalzi. I've always wanted to read the first before I went on to it. It's a pretty famous series of science fiction, space opera type, military science fiction books. Excellent. Very good. I did a book chat about it. I very much enjoyed it. Then William Reddy, an older volume, Understanding Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings. I wasn't a big fan. I mean, I'm glad I read it, but it wasn't that great. And then because there's so much coverage on BookTube and I haven't read any, I read Anthony Trollope's The Warden and really liked it. Victorian era fiction. Very, very much enjoyed it, and I'll probably read more. I have Barchester Towers here as my next one. I'll probably read this year. And then for military history, a nonfiction book, Intelligence in War by John Keegan. Very good. And part of my very intentionally slow reading of Patrick O'Brian's novels, and that was Post Captain, I just finished, and absolutely loved. I have a nice folio set of all the Patrick O'Brian, Aubrey Mattern novels, and I try to read a couple a year. And I read Master and Commander and Post Captain. Now I'll move on to, I think it's HMS Surprise, and I'm pacing it because I've got the set and I want to enjoy it over time, and it was fantastic. And then I delved into Lee Child, which I just did a book chat about, and The Midnight Line, and enjoyed it. It was fun. A good thriller. Nice little bit of a break. And then, of course, finish up here with Dragon Quest for the year. And so that put it at 58 books. Also starting a new BookTube channel and having a lot of fun. So I'll think a little bit about what 2018 is going to bring. I don't like to put myself in a straitjacket. I believe in serendipity. I like to go to a book sale and see something and put everything else down. I usually have 5 or 6 books piled here and there that I'm reading at any one time. It's just the way I do it. But I'll try to give at least some idea of what my plans are for 2018 in an upcoming video. But for all of you who've taken the time to watch the endless shelf tours, which I love doing and I love watching, and the occasional book chats and read-alongs and tags, all the new booktubers that I've managed to subscribe to and have conversations with, I thank you. And everybody who's commented over the last 6 months, and we've built up relationships, I thank you very much. And 2017 was a great year. So thank you, BookTube.